All characters and events in this publication, other than that clearly in the public domain, are fictitious, and any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. The Master of Names, copyright 2016 by R.L. Coy. Recording 2023. R.L. Coy Books presents The Master of Names by R.L. Coy. Chapter 1. A reading by Jeanette Coy. Part 2. Thinking about his father always brought back a sharp, familiar pain in Plum's heart. He tried to ignore it as he stared down into his porridge and started eating. Adriana sat beside him and tilted her head to one side, her blonde locks dangling down. "Something on your mind, sport," she said with a sigh. "I'm just thinking about Da," whispered Plum. "Yes," Adriana said knowingly. "September 7th again. The anniversary of the day that soldier came to the house. Oh, come on, my boy. Eat up your breakfast. Afterwards, I need you to deliver the grain down to Damien Fryer." Gobbling up his last bit of porridge, Plum stood up and left the room. He went out the front door and eyed the sack of grain laying lazily against the wooden slates of the house. He took it into his cart, the bag making a loud thud as he threw it in. He looked out across the wide pastures and took off in a run down the road to the town centre of Devane, pulling the cart behind him. Market days were usually held on Sundays, and it was always the busiest day in Devane. All of the merchants would report to Damien Fryer to have their stocks delivered to the Brown Pig Inn. Plum went down the road and ran as fast as he could towards the town. He could see the fountain of Devane and the busy town centre in the distance. He quickly ran towards the Brown Pig Inn, and leaving the cart outside, he dragged the grain in through the door. Panting, he exclaimed between gasps, "Grain! Grain is here!" A fat man with a piercing gaze looked over at the boy dragging in the grain. Plum left the sack by the front door and braced his hands on his knees, trying to get his breath back. The man scratched his long black beard and, hardly acknowledging Plum's effort, or even Plum himself, said aloud, "Good, the grain is here." He gave a small, satisfied smile and turned back to the other customer that he was handling. "Come and receive your money, boy," he said over his shoulder to Plum. Plum came over to the bar. Damien Fry was holding out a small sack of money to the boy, about 50 gold lorians in total. "There you go, an honest day's work. That stock of grain should last me about 2 months at least," Damien said. Plum observed him, noting how apt the nickname Friar was for Damien. He looked exactly like a church monk, except for his long beard. He also had a propensity towards money, and a strong drink. After a moment, Damien eyed Plum and said with an annoyed expression, "Why are you staring at me, boy? Something funny? Do you find me entertaining?" The threat in his voice was clear. "No, Damien, not at all," Plum said hurriedly. Damien interrupted him. "Well, if you're not going to buy anything with that money, then leave. I have a lot of business I need to take care of." He paused. "Oh, and say hello to your mother for me," he added. With that, Plum left the store. He knew better than to send any regards from that man. Damien had always liked Adriana, despite the age difference. Although Adriana was now 40, whereas he was only 30, a young man and in his prime, he didn't think that there was a problem. Women were all women to him. He had harboured feelings for her ever since his own wife had died. With him playing both mother and father to his 2 daughters and managing the inn, time was always taxing. He never really had enough time to do anything and was always consumed with business. In his mind, there was no such thing as a day off. Damien and his wife had moved from the city of Shine 7 years ago in search of better prospects. They had bought a run-down inn and turned it into a general store, which became very profitable. The fine print on the pact that Damien made with all of the travelling merchants made him the sole trader in all of Devane. The townsfolk and merchants alike did not appreciate the one-stop shop for all of their needs. The friar, as he came to be known throughout the trading circles of Law and beyond, had said that the merchants would receive more money with him than they were making anywhere else. That, however, turned out to be far from the truth. The merchants actually got less than they were asking for, and much less than their goods were worth. But under the contract enforced by the Kingdom of Shine, they had to deliver goods to this man and accept whatever they were given as thought fair by their employer. All the people in the town hated Damien for being a cheapskate, a swindler and a thief, perverted of integrity and decent business. He would use people until their stocks lost value, and then discard them without a second thought. Because of this, he was probably the wealthiest entrepreneur in all of Devane. Plum turned to home, with an empty wagon and a sack of coins jingling about his waist. Past the ruined church, up the hill, over the bridge, and away from the town centre, he came to a sign that read, "The Old Farm." Following the pointing arrow burned into the wooden sign, he pulled the cart up the hill towards his home. This was the hardest part of the journey. He had never liked it, even when he was little. He forced his cart forward with his muscles aching. The only joy for Plum was that with the cart empty, the ride down was always exciting. As long as Adriana didn't see. Plum could usually tell when his mother was in the house, because there was always the telltale waft of smoke coming from the chimney. As he came near the door, it opened with his mother standing there, and she asked with a happy tone, "Delivered the grain?" "Yes, Mum, I have." "Good. Well, I'm sorry to say that there is still much work to be done before you can come inside." Plum was already feeling tired and slightly peckish, but he did not protest. Adriana continued, "I want you to sweep out the old shed next to the windmill, prepare a mattress, and start a fire. Once you have done that, you may come in." Plum looked perplexed. "Why? That shed hasn't been used for ages. Not since we had that family over from Kingsport." "All the same," his mother said, "I want you to set up the shed. Is that understood?" "Yes, Mum, but why all this commotion?" "I just had a word from the government of Shine that they will be doing their annual arcane census to test whether any of the teenage boys here in Devane have magical capabilities." "But I still don't see why I have to do the shed," Plum insisted. Ignoring Plum, Adriana stated, "They've decided that the census delegate is to come and stay with us. So finish your chores, and then I will tell you more." Confused, Plum ambled to the shed. A small dirt road led away from the house and towards the old windmill. Beside it stood the shed. As he walked, Plum thought about what his mother had said. "But why don't they just stay at the Brown Pig Inn?" Plum thought. "Yeah, the rooms are smaller, but why would a delegate who's doing such an important task want to seek lodgings at a farm?" As he reached the door, Plum got out the rusty key his mother had given him. He turned it in the lock. The door swung open. Plum surveyed the room. A mop and bucket were just beside the door, and a mattress was standing up against the wall, airing. A bed was in the middle of the room, and there was a stone fireplace on the far side of the room. It was essentially a log cabin, comfortable but plain. Nothing as good as a palace or a king's bedchamber or rooms at the Brown Pig Inn, he mused, taking in the room. "Right, better get to work," Plum said to himself, remembering how hungry he was and his mother's instructions. He took the bucket and, heading out to the water pump right outside the shed, then he placed the bucket under the pump and started pumping out the water. It flowed into the bucket with a nice steady swooshing sound. Plum stopped pumping when the bucket was almost full to the top. He found a cake of soap at the bottom of the pump's sink. Picking it up, he put the cake of soap into the water. Then he started mixing the soap and the water together with his hands until it became frothy. Plum took it back inside. He took out the rag he had tucked into his pocket and soaked it in the bucket. With the rag, he methodically began to clean the windows, the walls, and then moved on to clean the floor with the mop. After the cleaning was done, he went over to the fireplace, grabbed the logs that were piled up beside it, and put them into the fireplace. Then, reaching for the chimney brush, he pushed the brush up the flue. As he did so, a heap of old ash fell on top of his head. Coughing and drenched in soot, He set the logs alight. They started to burn with a soft glow. By this time it was already dark, and with a quick sweep of the sooty fallout, Plum locked the door and ran back up the path to the house and to his mother.